Move, you will talk about radio, the best around every day. DJ K-Man and DJ Get Busy. Play the music. Everybody sing the song. We're a peaceful people, struggling with struggle, and we all look for struggle. From that around, from outside place, from foreign place, from around take it over, being back in town. So we ain't giving up home, we ain't giving up no street, we ain't giving up no river. That belongs to me. Not one to sake, not one rice bread, not one for us, not a blade of grass. I love the open country of the roof and on it. And the time on night. We make it excited. This is our home, we love it. And we meet the people. We have that right. So we ain't giving up a mountain. We ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up a river. That belongs to me. Not the one to suck it. Not one for us, one rice bread. Not one for us. Not the blade of grass. Not one gold and apple. Not one jamu. Not the drop of water. Not the road. Not one breadfruit. Not white tea. Not one minute. Not one lime tree. Not one sabanita. Not one gamelan. Not one sugarcane. Or a dry of lime. Not one cherry. Not one tracade. Not one guinea. Not one sake. Not one rice bread. That is all yours. Not a blade of grass. This land is our land now. We're gonna make it somehow. We'll defend like a ball, never break. All of us that came here, and they did that by hand, and we're moving from here. We go this way. So we ain't giving up the mountain. We ain't giving up the tree. We ain't giving up the river. That belongs to me. I don't want to suck it. I don't want rice bread. Not one for the rest. Not a blade of grass. Every time we sing this song to our Guyanese audience, a chorus does break out. And here is your chorus to break out. All you're going to sing. You don't come here to sit down and listen. You come here to sing. 1, 2, 1, 2. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. No, we ain't giving up. All right. We ain't giving up no river. That belongs to me. Not the one from Saki. Not the one rice bread. Not one for us. One more time. Not that blade of grass. Let me hear you. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, yes. No, we ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up no river. That belong to me, not the one to sun.
And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Today is, of course, Independence Day. We are observing our 56th year of independence, and um, whatever one may think about what has happened since 1956, the 26th of May, um, independence is significant. Independence is significant. Um, those of us who are old enough remember the moment, that day. I was a child, and I remember well the scenes. I remember the look on the faces of the people. I remember the smell. I remember realizing that something significant happened. Something significant happened. Of course, as we have moved further away from that Independence Day, as we have moved further away from that Independence Day, there have been lots of debates and lots of debates, and a lot has happened since then. But every time the 26th of May comes around, as a people, we have to, we must pay our respects to ourselves, to ourselves. You don't come out of 300 and more years of bondage and don't think that is significant. It is significant. And so the struggle to win our independence and the coming of independence should not be consumed by some of the ups and downs that we have had since independence. While the two are related, I think the disappointments in the last 56 years should not take away from the importance of our independence. We have new generations who are urging us not to look back, but to look forward. I am usually very sympathetic to younger generations, but in this instance, I would want to say to the younger generations that are saying we must not look back, to say that is backwardness. And it's a backwardness that has come because we have not reminded ourselves of the importance of independence enough, so that some of our younger people do not attach the significance to that moment. Our entanglement with our history has not been strong enough to confront that inevitable pull to forget our history. That history cannot and must not be forgotten. Today is Independence Day. Today is Independence Day. Today is Independence Day, and we want to do our little part here this evening in recognizing the importance of independence, but also to engage in some form of analysis of what has happened since independence. You know, becoming independent in 1966 came with challenges. It was a moment of hope, also a moment of challenges. We became independent in 1966 in a world that we did not create, that others had created a world order after the Second World War. The superpowers had gotten together and created a world order that was not made for us because we were still a colony. And so we became independent in 1966 in a world order that did not cater for us. It did not cater for post-plantation societies. We became independent with the challenge of moving from a plantation to a nation, because essentially Guyana was a plantation, a sugar plantation, producing everything for consumption by others and not for ourselves. We became independent in 1966 in the middle of a Cold War in which the two superpowers were squaring off against each other. And that the choices we had to make to protect our independence would inevitably clash with the Cold War. And the Cold War was important to the superpowers. We became independent, bringing to our independence not only a monoculture economy where we're producing one product, but we brought our independence, our ethnic strains. Our independence came at the end of ethnic strife from 1961 to 1964, where we almost consumed ourselves. We brought that challenge. We brought that to our independence too. Ultimately, the question was, and this is a question I would want to discuss with my panel tonight, what were the expectations of our independence? If for 300 and odd years we were existing in bondage, then it seems to me that the promise of independence must have been a promise of freedom. And how would we be free? Would we break all ties with our colonial past? Would we transform our society into a free society? So was independence about transformation, or was it about reform of the colonial order? Some critics of independence say that all we did was change the flag, change the national anthem, and we haven't done much else. I beg to differ. The changing of the flag and the changing of the national anthem meant something. It meant something important. I know for my generation, it meant something. To go to school and not to be forced to study Shakespeare, but to study and read George Lamian and Samuel Selvaughan and Edgar Metterholzer and Louise Bennett meant something. So this tendency sometimes to talk of our independence as if it didn't mean anything I think is not useful. We are all that we have brought. Our hopes, our aspirations, our successes, our failures. We have had abject failures. That too has to be put in the mix, but we can't define our independence only by our failures. By the same token, we cannot define our independence only by our successes. So here we are, 56 years later. Today, we observe, some of us reflect, some of us celebrate, some of us shrug our shoulders. But it's 56. We are 56 years old. And if we locate ourselves in the wider English-speaking Caribbean, we are 60 years old because Jamaica and Trinidad became independent in 1962 after the breakup of the attempt at political union through the Federation of 1958-1962. Guyana was not part of that federation, but the spirit of that federation resided here in Guyana. So in effect, we have to see ourselves as part of that federation. So yes, 1956 was our moment, but I think 1958, 1962 is also our moment. So tonight we're going to be talking about our independence. We're going to be talking about our independence. I have a panel, and I chose my panel carefully tonight. I had a generation in mind. Tonight we're gonna have Ralph Ramkaran of one generation, Cathy Hughes of the generation that followed, and young Dwayne Benjamin of a younger generation. And I did that because I didn't want to choose based on our political affiliation or our ethnic affiliation, because we tend to do that because we think of inclusiveness only in political terms or ethnic terms, and sometimes you don't pay enough attention to generation. And I wanted to pay attention to the generational perspective tonight, generation perspective. So let's go straight to our panel. Cathy Hughes, I don't think she needs an introduction. Cathy, good evening. Happy Independence.
Good evening, David. Good evening, everyone. Happy Independence.
And I know you are almost coming off of an airplane and coming to do this program. So I want to say thanks for that. Yeah.
I'm glad I made it.
Good. Thank you. These days, we're not sure whether these flights will arrive on time and leave on time. And it's hard to plan around them, but you're here, and thanks for that. Ralph Ramkaran. Good evening, Ralph.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me, and happy Independence all.
And Dwayne Benjamin, who is the baby with us tonight. Dwayne, good evening. We assume that you will be the more technologically alert than the rest of us. You have to put on your mic. We are not hearing you.
Sorry about that. Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening to members of the panel, and good evening also to your viewers, and happy Independence. to one and all.
And Dwayne is a lecturer at the University of Guyana. I think he, more than the other two, needs some introduction. Let me start with an almost subjective question, and I'll start with you, Kathy. What really does independence, when you think about independence over the period of time, what does it mean to you? And that question is also for Dwayne and Ralph.
Well, for me, it means being able to translate a vision that our foreparents, my grandparents would at the time would have had, in terms of building this new Guyana, a Guyana where we wouldn't be restricted by the confines of, a British society, British norms. It was a freeing, it was an opening up, it was an independence, as the word suggests. And it was also an independence in terms of not only mind, but being able to redefine ourselves in terms of our politics, our music, our people, looking deep within us and seeing how we really could forge that one people, one nation, one destiny. Being able to build a country and a society, and most importantly, an economy that really would be reflective of us as a people that come from so many different places into one melting pot. So I think that was the sentiment at the time, a new Guyana.
Dwayne, you're the youngest among us here. What does independence mean to you?
Thank you very much, Professor Hines, for your question. I think that independence, as Kathy said, it offers an opportunity for us to forge a nation. It is exactly 56 years ago that we announced the birth of a new country, a country that would be free from the shackles of colonialism, free from, and basically that country was forged out of the struggles of our ancestors and different generations prior to 1966. And it culminated with independence. And that it offered us an opportunity to do many things. In your introductory remarks, you spoke about transformation. And I think this is what independence meant for us. Opportunity for us to transform a new Guyana with a Guyanese mindset, a Guyanese thinking, and more so with Guyanese being able to control their own destiny. And I think that is what independence offered us. The taking down of the Union Jack and the raising of the golden arrowhead was just the symbolism. But I think deeper than just symbolism, there were much more. How do we forge a nation? Especially a nation that on the road to independence, it was not as smooth as was expected. I think the expectation that was that after we achieved independence, we would have been able to achieve the very thing we're still hoping to achieve today, national unity. So I think independence offered us a lot of opportunities to transform Guyana and transform a nation and mold a nation along the lines of our Guyanese foreparents and the vision that they had.
Ralph, let me bring you in here. And Dwayne talked about the road to independence. I had, in my introduction, had gone back to 58 with the Federation. But you, more than all of us here, you may want to take us back to 53. And because as we talk about 66 independence, we cannot just talk about that moment without, as Dwayne said and as Kathy hinted, within the context of the larger struggle for independence. So, I mean, as we look at that arc from the early 1950s to now, what does independence mean from your standpoint?
Well, the entire period, I was very small in the 50s. I became a teenager in the 60s. I was a teenager at the time of independence. But the whole era was one of great public, of engagement of the public with new and developing issues. The first big thing that happened in 1950, the first big thing that happened in 1950 was the formation of the PPP. But I don't think that was as engaged the public as much as the granting of universal adult suffrage in 1953. That was an extremely important development, as a development which um, attracted widespread support. Of course, there was a struggle to achieve it, but even though there was a struggle to achieve it, at that time things were changing. Um, countries were, the British had begun to relinquish control of its tight um, colonial strictures. You know, India had become independence. China was liberated in 1949. India got its independence in 47. And other countries in Asia and so on, African countries, Kenya, had been struggling for relief from colonialism, for fighting for independence. And Guyana was part of that huge movement. So there was a great turmoil in the colonial world at that time. It's a turmoil that affected Guyana. In the 50s, for example, after 57, there was a huge outcry against apartheid um, around the world. And that is when I first heard the word apartheid and learned what it meant. So all of that was going on in the 50s. When the time for independence came, we were already, the Guyana, the nation of Guyana was the colony of British Guyana, rather, was already heavily engaged in, the issue of independence. It was pending. In that early period, there was something called the History and Arts Council. Um, names which later became prominent, all developed in in the 60s. Names like Helen Tate with the dance, Angol Thompson, Wordsworth McAndrew, and all of these names became prominent in that era prior to independence. So the pre-independence struggle gave rise not only to political engagements, political discourses, and political developments, it also gave rise to cultural movements, movements in the arts and culture. That was the first time that we began to um, became conscious of the fact that Guyanese history was not being taught in our schools, that Caribbean literature was not being taught in our schools, and the ideas of developing indigenous cultural developments and so on. Those things became part of the understanding of what would indeed happen. Independence in Guyana was delayed for political reasons. You mentioned that Trinidad got independence in 62. We didn't get independence in 66. But we know the reasons. But at the time when Guyana got independence in 1966, it was a joyous moment. It was a moment of liberation for everybody. Everybody felt liberated. And we all looked forward at that time to a new and growing and developing and united Guyana. That's how we felt in 1966. That's how the period led up to 1966, leading up to 1966. So it was not a big change, that it was not something that was sudden. We knew the Guyanese knew what they wanted. We had a taste of what could happen. We had a taste of the potential of the economic development, of the history, of the cultural and social development, what was possible. A lot was changing in Guyana at the time also. socially. There was a liberation of classes. There were people entering the public service. There were Guyanese people who were taking over, who were moving into the top echelons of the public service. Guyanese who were not white. So all of that, all of those things were happening prior to independence. And that is what made independence an event that promised a great deal.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for that overview, because I think it's important. Let me ask all of you this question. In my introduction, I hinted at the challenges that we've had since independence, and I argued that we should not define our independence by our failures. Nor should we define it by our successes, that we should be more nuanced about our independence. But that's my view. But I'm going to ask you all a pointed question. What would you consider to be our signature success or successes of the independence project? And concomitantly, our great failure at independence. And I might be putting you all on the spot, but as a professor, I can't help but asking a question like that. Kathy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think our major success was our ability at that time to start focusing on what independence was going to mean to us. Mr. Ramkaran mentioned, I think our success was the strong stance we took as a country in the international arena. He mentioned the struggle to ending apartheid, and Ghana was extremely strong in that area. That was when we became a republic. Consider it's only now that Barbados has been able to grapple with that and take that step. It's a time when we, as part of this whole concept of our independence, started to look to being part of the non-aligned movement, not wanting to be put into a particular category and having to be forced into positions that were just based on our history and our previous association. So I think all those are some of, we made a great name for ourselves in terms of course, later on, in terms of our participation in key international organizations. And here I'm thinking of individuals like Sir Sridhar Ramphal, our role within the Commonwealth. Guyana was very, very respected internationally at that time. So I think we were forging ahead. The biggest failure, the biggest mistake, I think that we really did not spend enough time focusing on what it was going to be a Guyanese. We didn't spend enough time focusing and forging what it would mean to all of us. And I think we underestimated that because we had different individuals, different groups of people coming from different countries with different histories, different races, all put together into one melting pot. I think we did not consider enough how we were going to deal with the issues of healing in some respect, because here I'm talking about a group that came out of slavery, reconciliation, even those that came under indentureship that still had severe challenges and expectations that were not met when they came to this part of the world. So I think in retrospect, the failure to deal with these issues and to forge a Guyanese culture, a Guyanese vision, who we are as a people, and what we wanted to achieve, that at least we could have agreed on maybe 4 or 5 things and not be in a constant, what appears to be a fight from independence right through to now. We appear to just be fighting, and it's just a matter of who is winning the fight at a particular time in our history. We consider places like Trinidad and, most importantly, Jamaica, which despite their groups have somehow been able to spend a little more time and create that vision of what it is to be a Jamaican that almost everybody can identify with. And we started with our music, and quite a few other things. In sports, we made our name later on with people like Clive Lloyd leading the West Indies at that time. Great stamp internationally, what it is, what a Guyanese is, where we are. But I think those would be my comments on our ability, our success, and of course, our failure.
Dwayne, what, from your standpoint, our greatest success and our greatest failure?
Dr. Hines, I would like to, if I put it this way, expand a bit more on Kathy's point. And I think that she mentioned a lot of the respect that we had in the international arena and in the different international forums. But I think if we look carefully, those successes were based on our ability and the focus that we give to education, especially after 1976, where education was completely nationalized and we moved from a sort of elitist type education and made education accessible to the great masses in the society. But not only that we made it accessible, but we also reformed the curriculum, had numerous curriculum reforms that were focused essentially on Guyanese content and promoting indigenous development. Um, Also building the kind of human resource that was necessary to support Guyana's development trust. Some of those institutions are very still in existence today. You could look back at many teachers trained in college and others. But the point about it is that we had universal free education from nursery to university, and it's something that is still enshrined as a right in our constitution today. And I think that is one of our success. I mean, we had lots of success coming out of that. Um, but I think while we've managed to had success in education, I think somewhere along the line we missed the mark. And we missed the mark in terms of how we could have used that education in some way or the other to achieve what our objectives were after we would have gained independence, more so how we would have achieved national unity. Um, while we did much in promoting the Guyanese curriculum, if we want to put it that way, and creating the ideal Guyanese man, the ethnic problems we failed to address. And I think successive governments post-independence failed to address the ethnic problem. And we continue to be a divided nation, and we continue to be essentially a fractured society where we compete. And I think the problem have been made even worse by the fact that we have failed to address the issues of governance, especially the Westminster model, where we have winner take all politics. Just look and see how our parliament actually functions. If you're the governing party, it's because you control the parliament. You control that 51%, and the 49% basically is powerless. They have no say. Um, so we failed to address that problem, and it is even more pronounced when considering that in most cases our voting pattern is along ethnic lines. So we have failed also in some way or the other to address the the well to find a solution to that governance problem. If we look, for example, at Suriname, they have managed somewhat to deal with that problem in the sense that almost every election kind of produce coalition governments would give significant participation even to the minority groups within the society. I don't think we have seriously even begin to address that problem. And I think that is one of our post-independence failing. Um, there, there, there are other feelings that we, there are other feelings that I think we failed to address after independence, but I leave that to my senior colleague to address.
Ralph, they've set it up nicely there for you.
Well, the question was, what did independence mean to me? You asked the panelists, what did independence mean to you? And I would like to return to the question of did independence mean to me? Well, independence meant liberation, but liberation within a context. If you follow the history of the PPP was in office between 1957 and 1964, and then the PNC-UF coalition took office in 1964. Independence occurred in 1966. But if you follow the pattern of the 7 years that the PPP was in office, one of the main issues that confronted the government was the problem of economic development and the constraints which were placed on the government towards economic development. For example, they couldn't negotiate loans outside of outside of the traditional sources, like Great Britain gave aid, but the government was not free to negotiate loans and economic deals. You might remember, I don't know, all of you were young people, if or children at the time. We had a plan for the Tiger Hill, very modest very modest hydroelectric um, power station. It couldn't get aid for that. So if you go back to 1963, when Terry Jagan signed the Sands letter and agreed for the British government to impose, what was his explanation at that time? His explanation was that Guyana could not remain a colony any longer, that he could not envisage Guyana remaining a colony. Independence was an urgent issue, an immediate issue. So independence meant liberation from the constraints of colonial rule that prevented Guyana from moving forward. That was what independence meant for me. For many years after, people used to say, especially since, our economy did not take off in any significant way, many people older than I was, used to say that it was better that we were with the British. It was a bad thing for the British to have left. Colonialism was better than independence. You don't hear that nowadays. But up to not too long ago, there were those voices. And it was always a great tragedy for people not to have been able to see beyond the constraints which colonialism had placed on Guyana. The removal of those constraints have not been all positive, but it did allow Guyana to chart its own course and to get the freedom to negotiate and to move forward. And that, for me, the liberation of Guyana from colonial constraints was the thing that most affected me in a very positive way at that time.
Failures, Ralph?
Well, the failures that occurred post-independence was the failures of governance, was the failure to resolve. There were two problems that Guyana faced at the time. There was the political problem and there was the ethnic problem. The way in which the political problem was dealt with, the way in which the political problem was 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 treated with, um, exacerbated the ethnic problem. For example, in Trinidad, which is similarly constructed to us, a similar society, similar history, similar ethnic composition, of this roughly the same percentages and so on. Trinidad did not follow the same path as we did. So what aggravated the ethnic situation in Guyana as it did not in Trinidad was the political problem. The political problem was that Jagan was seen as a leftist, and the Americans did not want a government in Guyana that could potentially take Guyana the route of Cuba. The British had a different position. The British felt that Cherry Jagan and the PPP was an old-time nationalist political party with left orientation, which would have a self-correction, like many others. In Kenyatta was one, for example, to use one example, uh, that there would have been a self-correction once the country got independence under Jagan, that there would have been a self-correction. Well, the Americans intervened in that situation and persuaded a reluctant British government. Ian MacLeod, who was a conservative, the Tory Secretary of State for the colonies, was very reluctant. And so was Macmillan. If you remember, the history tells us that Kennedy himself had to go to Macmillan, and he diverted a trip somewhere else. He went and he dropped into the UK, and he met Macmillan at Macmillan's country home somewhere. And so this was right, but this had to happen. This happened right up at the highest level because the British were reluctant, and Kennedy persuaded, not persuaded, but I think he pressured Macmillan to agree. And so that political intervention by the Americans, and to which the British joined, is the factor that aggravated the ethnic problem in Guyana. We remember when Cherry put forward, after the pressure became very strong, there were the troubles in the 60s, and Cherry proposed a coalition government, sought the intervention of Eric Williams, sought the intervention of Nkrumah. There was a Ghanaian team and so on. Barnum rejected it because the deal was already done, and Barnum knew that he was going to get into office at some point in time, not too long after. And therefore, it was that interjection of the political problem that was responsible for the aggravation of the ethnic problem. Serious though it was, Rodney said at some point that having a united political party was not was not something that would have been expected. And having happened, it was not expected to be sustained. It was not sustained, but we did not develop like Trinidad. We developed differently. And the reason for that was the injection of the politics.
And Ralph Ramkaran there, he didn't use the word geopolitics. Geopolitics, race and ethnicity, and the governance, it seems to me that in 2022, we are facing the same thing that Ralph is talking about in the context of the 60s. We're going to take a short break. And my brother Lincoln Lewis is getting to talk to us a little bit about a project that he's part of. Lincoln, are you there? Lincoln Lewis? I don't think we're not seeing Lincoln on. We are not seeing Lincoln Lewis on. So we'll continue here with our discussion. Pasi, I come back to you because I come to 2022.
Mhm.
And as we look back, Ralph introduced the question of the economy. We talked about race and ethnicity. We talked about foreign policy. We talked about education. Ralph introduced the question of the economy. Here we are in 2022 with oil. We are an oil producing economy. How does that change, or how does it potentially help to move the country from a dependent economy, post-independence, to a really independent country, an independent economy, an independent country?
David, potential is a word that as a youngster I used to say. In university days, I used to say that should be just taken out of a Guyanese dictionary, because for so many years we had talked about potential. I have grown up on this word potential, and I figure I'm going to retire with us not realizing the potential. So I mentioned that to say that the recent discoveries of oil has given us an awesome opportunity to change Guyana. The potential could be realized in terms of the access to the funds that we need to do so many of the infrastructure projects and things we couldn't do in the past just because of the cost of everything, finance. But from what I have seen take place in recent years, we're not going to make that transformation. We're not transforming Guyana. The few individuals, the minority in our society, the ones that hold the economic power, and unfortunately, we're getting very close to where Jamaica was in the mid 60s, when there was a frightening statistic that 10% of the population owned and had access to 60% of the country's resources and gross national product. And in Guyana's context, I think what we're doing now is that those that had a head start because of history, because of their businesses, they're the ones that are able to take advantage of the newfound opportunities. For the rest of the society, it's not touching them at all. And I think a classic example I could say that was highlighted in the last budget presentation, when we actually gave close to $607 million was in US dollars was injected into the economy, into the budget. And as Dwayne has mentioned, free education, which is in our constitution, which we actually had. I grew up and benefited from free education, and saw that hundreds of thousands of Guyanese over the years. The fact that we would not make a strong commitment and put some of those funds back in to making education free for Guyanese. And here, even if we didn't want to start off at the university level at UG, we could at least have mandated that at all the technical institutes, more could be done to ensure that our local Guyanese and our young people could access the level of adequate training that required them to be able to participate in this new industry. And by that, I mean very specifically, you talk about local content, but yet we have few young people that can go to a center that is well equipped. I'm not talking about a GTI that is still equipped insufficiently for the new trends in an oil and gas industry. I'm talking about injecting funds that could transform that institution and all the others in Berbice, in Linden, that would make it possible for any young Guyanese that is excited about oil to be able to go. It means paying their transportation to be able to go to GTI on the days they're going for the course. It means ensuring that they have maybe a little lunch stipend. It means ensuring that they have the little toolkit at the end of the day, that their fees are paid. That is a norm in most European countries and many other parts of the world. And the fact that we couldn't make that strong signal to show the commitment we were willing to make, not just the words, but the real commitment. And we spent close to 2 weeks arguing in the parliament, trying to work out exactly what projects those funds were going to go into. And as everybody knows, the record is there. There was very little clear indication on how the money is going to be spent. So the transformation will not take place. It's a small group of people that will be able to benefit. And the trickle down to ordinary Guyanese is absent. And unfortunately, it looks like maybe absent. I would like to be proved wrong.
Dwayne Benjamin, the coming of oil, will it enrich and deepen our independence, or will it retard our independence? I put it as frankly as that to you. We're not hearing you. We're not hearing.
Yes, I was saying it's a frank question, but it's not a straightforward question as I think you would have envisaged. There's a number of things. Let me start off. Oil in 2022 is an opportunity to transform as you call it, a plantation economy or a post-plantation economy into a modern economy. And if we go back in history, that plantation economy that you speak of is an economy in which it was based on having a few managerial persons with a large number of semi-skilled or unskilled, because it required basically laborers, large amount of manual labor. So for a very long time, our economy have been suffering the effects of having little to no skill base, basically. So that oil in 2022 caught us off guard. And this is where now we're in we're way behind. In fact, we're almost like 20 to 30 years behind. And we're trying to catch up to build a high-skilled economy, an economy that what oil basically comes with is the demand for high skills. And we have approached that using a kind of model that probably worked well in the past, but not without its criticism. I'm making reference indirectly to the Arthur Lewis model, where we've invited foreign investors to come with the hope that they bring their resources, financial, they build the skills, they bring the skills, and they build all that is necessary to start up this new industry. And that the expectation for us is that we anticipate we'll get economic growth, we'll get the trickle-down effect of that growth, which is development, will improve quality of life and all the nice things that comes assumedly with the foreign investment. However, it has come with a very heavy price tag. And if you look and follow what's happening with a lot of the controversies around the contract and the cost that Guyana is actually bearing to sustain the developments or sustain the growth potential of that oil industry, it means therefore that we have a problem. There is a problem. And the problem is not unique because, and if we go back to what those theories, dependency theories and others, including the New World Group that your fellow WPA colleague, Professor Clive Thomas, was being part of, basically they try to push alternative on how to break away from the very shackles of those colonial type economies, that the experiments could not be sustained. So it means, therefore, that we are in a dilemma as it is right now. We're in a dilemma because there are a number of reasons. there are a number of things that is going against us. One, we do not control the source of the wealth. We do not. We basically, it is out of our hands. It's more in the hands of this very foreign ownership. The very problems that we had post independence is the very problems we're facing today. But more so is that, and I think Kathy alluded to it when she talked about the gap between the rich and the poor. And from what I'm seeing from my vantage point, I think is that what is going to happen is exactly what's been happening all the time. Those who have money to invest and those who can actually access the market and benefit would be able to. But the great majority of persons, we're talking about the teachers, we're talking about the police, the nurses, the doctors,
Yeah.
The people who their services to this country every day is actually meaningful in achieving development. Those are the persons, unfortunately, the great majority of public servants included, will be excluded. So we will have problems, and those problems generally in societies, whether developed or undeveloped societies, always lead to conflict in terms of conflict over the issue of distribution of the wealth. And I think that Guyana's problem will be more complex because it's not only a class, a survival, a bread and butter issue, but this is also more complex because we have an ethnic problem as well as more recently we have a problem in which it seems as though we are at a political stalemate. So until we can fix those problems, I don't think that it the future is that bright as we think. Despite that, we'll hear about your we're hearing about GDP growth is expected to be 4 to 5%. I tell you what, 2 or 3 major companies in an economy could drive GDP as much as 50% increase. But it doesn't reflect, it's not an accurate reflection of the actual development that is taking place within the society.
Ralph Ramko, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Ralph Ramkoran, you said independence for you meant liberation. Liberation. We don't hear that term, that word much these days.
That word
Do
died out.
you think? Do you think the coming of the oil economy will help us to achieve that liberation?
Well, yes and no. The people wiser than myself have said that one of the problems with poor countries like ours, especially countries prone to division that have ethnic issues, not only Guyana, all over the place, is always a struggle for the division of scarce resources. When resources are no longer scarce, one would expect those divisions to ease. I don't know, but there's a logic. The logic follows that if ethnic divisions are exacerbated by scarce resources, then if resources are no longer scarce, then ethnic divisions should ease. I don't know, but that is something to think about. Now, we live in a capitalist society, and all capitalist societies have a percentage of people, it varies from country to country, a percentage of people owns resources far greater than the actual percentage. 10% of people own 40, 50, 60% of the resources. Every capitalist country is that way. Not only Guyana, every single capitalist country in the world is like that. So is the United States, every single one. So if we are going to have a capitalist development in Guyana, you have to expect, it follows that a percentage of people will own a larger percentage of the resources. Now, the people who own Guyana today, who owns Guyana's economy today, is not Indians or some other ethnic group. The people who own Guyana's economy today are the oil companies. Oil is the biggest resource. They don't own it yet because the production is not high yet. It's only 100,000 barrels a day. Later on in this year, it will become 200,000 barrels a day. Next year or the year after, it will become 700,000 barrels a day. So the people who will be driving the economy of Guyana and who will be owning the most influential resource in Guyana would be the oil companies, not business people. So I believe, I can only hope that with the resources, I mean, we're talking about spending. Spending what? Spending money on what? There is no money as yet. There's a little bit of money, a little bit of additional resources in the bank, and we're talking off the top of our head about spending. There is no money yet. So the people of Guyana, the working people of Guyana, the poor people of Guyana who are struggling across all ethnicities, the people who are struggling worse than anybody else are people in the hinterland, can't expect that their conditions will improve within the next few weeks or the few months or next few months. What Guyana has to be distributed in a way that everybody gets a bit of relief. Now, you can argue about some people get more than others. I'm not getting into that. That's a different story. But what I'm saying is the resources are not available as yet for any impactful spending to alleviate the current conditions. I just want to talk about this issue about free education. America doesn't have free education. Britain doesn't have free education. When Guyana had its disastrous experiment with free education, the quality of education dropped at the University of Guyana. It was a disaster. So, and I noticed that the government has promised free education by next year, before the end of its term or something like that. It's not something that I agree with, because I'm afraid that the same thing that happened when we had free education without having the base of resources to support it, that the same thing will happen again. But let's see. I support free education, and I have no doubt that as our economy grows, that free education will become very much possible. Whether it's possible today or next year, as the government promises, I don't know. But we have a lot of work and energy to put in to ensure that the problems that we now face are not going to occur, are going to be alleviated. Now, there is no basis at the moment for us armchair generals to sit down and pontificate about shared governance or what the opposition should do or the government should do. The political parties have said publicly, officially, we do not want shared governance. They haven't said so, but they say we want inclusive governance. It means that they are not supportive of shared governance at the moment. So those armchair generals who say that the opposition should do something that they're not doing, or not do something that people recommend that they should do, should bear in mind that the political parties in Guyana are saying that they are for inclusive governance. That means they're not for shared governance.
We come back to independence and what it should mean. Rab said it should mean liberation. Both Patty And Dwayne talked about that it should mean being Guyanese. Being Guyanese. Liberation, being Guyanese. Ralph used the C word, capitalism. So now we have capitalism. We have external people overtly controlling the economy, according to Ralph. Is our independence more compromised today than it has ever been? That, for me, is the question, because I go back to independence. We will be liberated by the content, the tenor, and the direction of our independence. That's clear. We bring, unlike places like the United States, and so we bring that burden of bondage, centuries of bondage. It means, therefore, that our people's expectation of independence is different from those in the metro. With this capitalism, overt external ownership, the lingering ethnic problems, I'm not asking if our independence is impossible. Is it more compromised today than it has ever been? Kathy Hughes.
I want to answer also in the context of responding to some of the comments made by Mr. Ramkaran.
Sure.
I want to say that the factor that we miss is that surely after 56 years, and I don't know if we forget that we had over 500 million in that National Resource Fund that has come out. Let's be honest and talk about that. Today, we still have young Guyanese. I am personally aware of 5 8-year-olds that could not write their names properly. And they're coming from a school called Ketley Primary. We are all aware of the levels of poverty in this country. It's an illusion to think that young people today are able to go to school with enough food in their tummies to be able to sit in a comfortable school environment where they don't have to sweat because the roof of the school is zinc right above, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon they can't even think. In fact, by 11 o'clock in January and February and May, you can't even study properly. And I know that for sure because I've seen many of these schools. And so the point I want to make is that there's a minimum standard any government has to make and should provide to the citizens of the country. And when you talk about the U.S. not having free education, let me tell you, there are enough state schools in the U.S. where you pay $50 and $100 a term. And when you go into the community colleges that still allow you, we see the ads on the news, into any international news or cable channels, advertising all the time. It exists. And what we're saying is that we must start making those decisions, because that child in the US will pay $100 and go to a school that has all the equipment, all the resources to enable them to learn. And as we all know, the US ensures or tries its hardest to ensure that everybody comes up with at least a high school diploma. We are failing at doing that minimum standard here. And until we start to say that some of that 500 million could at least have bought a tablet and a data plan for every single Guyanese child during COVID. We still have schools that are having to close every now and again because there's an outbreak of COVID, and we're going back to learning online. And the reality is a large percentage of our population can learn online. For start, the homes don't have a place that they could sit quietly. 3 or 4 children in a room trying to do online learning with the only data plan is on mommy, who is a security officer's phone, and she gone to work with the phone, and the state couldn't give them at a minimum a tablet, a computer, and a data plan. And there's recent research that highlights these points that I'm making. I'm talking about research in the last 6 months that show we continue to leave a lot of our population out. So it's capitalism, yes. There's a certain political party that is clearly a capitalist party, but hasn't changed the definition in the policies and in the documents that define what that party is. So these are the things when we talk about independence. These are the areas that we have failed to make decisions that is moving everybody forward. And again, when we talk about the Exxons of this world now being in charge of Guyana, the reality is the only bodies that could play the game with the Exxons are a very small business community. And we see little or no attempts to widen the base, to involve more people. So in terms of the independence, there's so much more we can do. We keep looking at where we are right now. We need to also examine where we could have been, because there are smaller Caribbean islands that have dealt with some of these issues far more efficiently, less resources than us, less landscape, less geographical landscape. Look at Barbados for a classic example. In Guyana, we have been given so much in terms of national resources, so much in terms of minerals, land, everything, you name it. The oil is just the most recent thing, and we've squandered every single opportunity consistently since independence.
Dwayne, are we compromised now more than ever? Our independence?
David, before I get to answering that question, I think I want to address the issue of capitalism, because I get the feeling that capitalism is interpreted to mean unbridled free market. And there are different models of capitalism. I think my senior colleague, Ralph Ramkaran, is looking at the British and the American model. But in the Scandinavian countries in their own regards are capitalist countries also. But they've managed to also put welfare in systems in place or safety nets to protect the poor and vulnerable in their societies. China is by its own right a capitalist country also, but does not practice the kind of free market thing I think that is practiced in Britain and the United States. So the variations. Where Guyana is concerned, I think we constrain our independence the fact that we're scrambling and we're doing different things to get the human resource necessary. In fact, I would want to believe that there are probably more Trinidadian boots on the ground in Guyana in our oil sector, and probably more foreigners in our oil sector than Guyanese at the moment, because we don't have the human resources. The government don't have the skills, the private sector don't have the skills. We're now working towards producing the skills. I think without even being told indirectly that that is one of the objectives of the Gold Scholarship Program, but I'm not sure whether we actually look at that scholarship program within the context of our development needs and also within the context of our challenges. I think we've just been importing programs, for example, from India, from all over the place, and we bring them and we say, well, we're training people in a short space of time and we're giving them online training. I don't think that that is what is absolutely necessary at the moment. I might be wrong, but time will tell. Time will tell, and we'll see. At some point later, we can do an objective analysis of that particular program. But to answer the question, we are constrained our independence. The fact that we have large, powerful companies, that in some cases the wealth that resides in those companies are much more, far more than our GDP. So, and make no mistake, also, wherever foreign companies are, we could assume the governments are there, as well as the military, because there's a relationship between multinational corporations, the government, and the military, and they all work hand in hand. So I think that while we may not want to say or use the term colonialism, I think intellectuals have coined a different term. They call it neo-colonialism, and I think that's what we're experiencing at, at the moment.
We came out of independence with the burden of poverty. We came out of independence with everything that went with the burden of poverty. In the first decade or so of independence, we started to grapple with poverty. We started to grapple with the question of the undereducated, the level, the low level of education in our society, not only in Guyana, but in the rest of the Caribbean. All of those were constrained by external factors, the Cold War, imperatives, and in the case of Guyana, our own ethnic problems. We now come to 2022. We have oil. Ralph, yes, the big wealth has not started to come, but enough has started to come to Guyana. Are we dealing with the question of poverty? Are we going back and saying the objective of our independence is to empower the vast majority of our poor and powerless people? And now we have oil. Are we saying, in the context of politics, capitalism, external ownership, do we still have our eyes on the objective of independence, which is the liberation, to use your term, Ralph, of the poor and the powerless? How do we use this oil wealth, that it's little, that it's a lot? How do we use it to deal with the burdens that we brought from colonialism, that we attempted in the first decades of independence to deal with, and that we couldn't deal with effectively? Now we have a chance. Are we asking ourselves that question? Are we thinking about oil within the context of the expectation of independence? Ralph Ramkaran.
Well, just to answer immediately what you directed, and I'll come to the question of independence in a moment. The way in which poverty can be alleviated, in my understanding, immediately is to spend resources, not to give away money, but to spend resources, firstly on education for children and adults, and on social services, including health and social welfare for the people of Guyana. As far as I understand, that is the immediate way in which poverty can be alleviated and poverty removed. Now, I am not here to defend the government of Guyana. And if you want to check whether those things are happening, you have to go to the budget and see what is being spent, what is being spent from this year to what was being spent 10 years ago, what is being spent this year to what was being spent 5 years ago, and what is being spent this year to what was being spent 3 years ago. And that is where you will find your answer. There is another issue that has been attracting public attention, and that is the delivery of direct resources to individuals, to people, to help them, to cash grants to people to help them. I have written in support of that, and it has worked in many countries where it has been properly managed and distributed. And I have advocated it. And if it's possible, I'm not sure if it's possible now with the resources that are available, but if it's possible, fine. You know, Kathy talks about the poor education and compare it with other countries. I agree with all that she says. But up to recently, Guyana was spending $300 a month per child per year in education. Barbados was spending $800 US per child per year for education. If you take the full $500 million that are available, 500 million US, and put it in the education system, I am sure that you will not be able to reach the amount of money that's being spent by Barbados on education. And while Barbados was spending $800 a month on education, its per capita income was twice as large or something in that vicinity as Guyana. So the question of all of these things have to do with resources that are available. Is our independence compromised? That's the question you started out this section of the debate with. No, independence has to be looked upon within different contexts. In the era of the Cold War, to proclaim yourself independent is to mean that you are not aligned to either the West or to the East. And that is why this big Third World movement grew and developed, to which Guyana was a leading member and in which Guyana played a leading role. That is how we displayed in political terms and in international relations our independence. A unipolar world developed after the fall of the Soviet Union and the socialist countries. Independence came to mean something different. As soon as that happened, you may recall, the United States demanded free and fair elections in Guyana, and that occurred in 1992. Independence meant something different then. Today, we are being attacked, not physically, but we are being attacked by Venezuela on our borders. The Venezuelan claim against Guyana's territory has become hysterical. The agreement to have independence has to be considered in that context. That's a different context in which we need to consider our independence. And if we agree for the United States to send its ships in Guyana's waters to follow drug traffickers, and no doubt, David, you and I will understand that they will also have an eye on what Venezuela is doing. Now, is that a compromise of our independence? So, independence has different meanings in different contexts, in different historical contexts, and in different conditions. So, I don't know that because Exxon owns Guyana's resources, that will necessarily compromise our independence. But nevertheless, we have to, as a small country, still with our resources, we are not a powerful country. Our independence has to be understood in that context and in the context in which we have a different world today than what we had 30, 40 years ago.
Kathy, Ralph raises a very important aspect of context. I mean, you are stressing the social context Ralph is stressing, of course, the geopolitical context. I take Ralph's argument, but I'm saying that it's not one context, but several contexts, right? That we are grappling with is the
Yeah,
geopolitical context, and there's the
yeah.
context that you are stressing. It is the local context in terms of distribution of resources. But let me don't speak for you. You speak for yourself.
No, I agree with Mr. Ramkaran on that point for sure. That there's several areas and contexts within which we have to examine this issue, and certainly Venezuela and the protection of our borders and our geographical landscape and the concept of where Guyana is in physical demarcation terms is very, very important towards any discussion and our concept of independence. I think the general feeling that or concern that I have, and this is where I was very interested when you started off talking about the generations that are participating in this program, and it's a very useful approach to take. At the end of the day, when we consider the economic, whether it's the economic context, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that really when we look at energy, for example, over the years we failed to do anything really in terms of energy. We mentioned the fact that in terms of our building racial cohesion, we've not done much there. There are so many projects that have never really gotten off the ground. That's never really happened. You look at the right bank of the river in Shanghai, and you look at a place that was built in 25 years, and we're talking about you miss going to Jamaica for 5 years, and there's a whole new development
Oh,
that's taking
yes.
place. You could not come to Guyana. I saw that in the waterfront front area. They have now developed a port that looks like yeah, a smaller version of one of the ports you see in Singapore, much smaller version. But what I'm saying is that you go to a place like Jamaica and you don't go for 5 years, and there are things you will see that has happened. You could miss coming to Guyana for 7 years, and it's exactly the same way. We celebrate one little road that should have been done 30 years ago. I mean, really, when are we going to get with the program? And what is sad is that my generation, I am a product of free education in Guyana. I'm a product of a system. I went to school, St. Rose's, where previously you had to be very light skinned. Only a certain amount of people could go in, and then I then was able to do an exam, and we had a multitude of people from all over the place, including the son of a rice farmer that sat next to me for nearly 3 years. And the beauty about that is that he made me understand what his world was like, and he could understand what my world was like. And in between that, we could build a friendship. What I'm saying is that today, my generation has had so many more opportunities. Dwayne's generation is the generation that now has to transform. But I feel very, very disheartened that after saying, having a mother that said for so many times, I'm not going to see this country being changed. And now in my generation, I'm saying, girl, I ain't going to see it either. Maybe Dwayne's generation could see it. And the reality is, we have to be honest and say we have done little with all that we have been given. We got countries that are just rocks that have done more with what they have. And when do we get serious? When do we decide that we have to sit down as 6 different races and deal with this issue? When are we going to start having some form of healing and reconciliation? Because everybody feels hurt, especially the two major ethnic groups. And we keep pretending that it really ain't as bad, and we continue in this fight. I started off by saying all we are doing is fighting. Every day is a fight. The parliament is next almost a waste of time now. Getting to that, because you have limits on the discussion that you can have. You have important issues that are brought to the parliament that cannot even be discussed. Right? When you look at some of our organizations, look at the police force, look at the judiciary, and I'm mentioning those only in the context of respect for both. But I'm mentioning it in the context of Guyanese people having limited confidence in those institutions and in other institutions. So our institutions have not been put on a secure footing over these 56 years. Many of them, an ordinary Guyanese would not define as being independent. And all these issues, including the challenge we face on our border, will impact on how we're going to be able to move this country forward. It calls for radical change in an approach. You cannot have, and we talk about, again, Mr. Ramkaran mentioned the cash grants. I am in absolute support of cash grants. But you can't do it the way it has been done, where you give a one-off 19,000 and you got, 600 people arguing and telling you that they ain't get theirs. And then you give two stipends of 250,000.
I feel lost Cathy there. There may be some bandwidth issues there. Some bandwidth issues there. Ralph, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. Ralph, while we wait for Cathy to come back, I read your column this past weekend here on biometrics. And I have to say that I agree with your column. Almost 100%. I have a little problem that when you talk about the violence, you left out the violence of May 6 that happened in Bath Settlement. But we can put that aside. Do you not still think that your generation, which is the one just before me, I am of Cathy's generation, that your generation and my generation, Cathy's generation, will old Dwayne's generation, that we still have a responsibility to really play a more decisive role in overcoming that thing that you identify, that even biometrics, you argue, biometrics is not going to solve that thing. I agree with you 100%, right? Because we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way to politicize biometrics. But as I read your thing, I'm saying, don't you still think that because our generation is closer to the notion of independence, our generation, that we still have perhaps a more moral responsibility to do a little bit more to overcome a problem which you identified?
Well, I agree. I agree that there's much more that we can do to push the process of reconciliation further. And I think, I was trying to point out that there is a possibility because in PNC years, in the years of the APNU AFC government, an Indian guy by the current head of the Elections Commission, Vishnu Prasad or something, he went to the Ethnic Relations Commission, and he complained that I was discriminated against by the Ethnic Relations Commission. And the Ethnic Relations Commission during the term of office of APNU AFC, a commission that was appointed by APNU AFC, said, we agree with you that you were discriminated against. I don't know what further happened to the matter. But I use that example to argue, and unfortunately, Henry Jeffrey did not agree with me, that to argue, neither did Aubrey Norton. I use that example to argue that, okay, if shared governance is not on the cards at the moment, what is the alternative? Go and beg President Irfan Ali to put things on his agenda, on your discussion agenda, and solve these problems. That's your strategy. President Irfan Ali is a politician. Every time you ask him to put something on his agenda, he will think of it in political terms. Is this a good thing for me to discuss? If I discuss it, will it have an impact on the elections to come? And those are the issues that will attract President Ali. And if Mr. Norton was President Norton, and opposition leader Irfan Ali go to him with the same thing, President Norton will think the same way. So my humble suggestion is that utilize what is available, that was provided for in the Constitution, which Henry Jeffrey condemns. Go to the Constitution. It's the same Constitution provided for Ethnic Relations Commission, which worked. An Ethnic Relations Commission appointed by APNU AFC worked against APNU AFC institution, the Elections Commission, and it's APNU AFC's appointed chairman, James Patterson, and ruled in favor of an Indian gentleman who had complained to the. So those are the possibilities with all the other commissions. And you don't then have to sit down all day and ask for the ethnic discrimination and marginalization. Mr. President, could you please place this matter on the agenda and let's discuss it? That's not, I don't know that that's the way I'm not Mr. Norton's advisor. I can't advise him. But if I were in that position, I would take my evidence to the various commissions and committees that exist. Why, for example, Ashni Singh can't be summoned to the Economic Services Committee 1 month before the proposes the budget, and you tell me what you are doing for Buxton in the budget. Tell me what you are doing in Linden for the budget. Tell me what you are doing in Victoria for the budget. Why that can't happen? Are those the questions you're going to put to President Ali? What will President Ali say to you? So that is that we have to push, and we have a duty to press these things, regardless of if Henry thinks that he's an armchair general, and you can tell the parties, well, that's the way to go.
David, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
go ahead, finish.
I have to interrupt. I have
Yes,
to.
all
I
right,
have to
go ahead.
interrupt. I'm really, really very bothered. I don't know if the honorable former speaker is unaware of what's taking place today, right? But we had a president that within a couple hours of assuming office went from a speech that said we are embracing everybody to I'm not speaking with you unless you say that I legitimately won this election. I know of no other president, any other part of the world that does something like that. And at the same time, if you compare the approach President Biden had in reaching out across all the divides, trying to bring everybody on board. Mr. Ramkaran asks why we can't ask MP and minister with responsibility for finance to come and explain what's in the budget for Buxton. I can answer that by saying the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs would not even consider the request. So it is absolutely, I think, unacceptable that we could suggest that what we have today allows us to have a discussion. Look at the madness that has taken place with the opposition not being invited to national events. I did a post about that, Republic, when I happened to be at the parliament and thought to myself, my God, this is the house. I'm a representative of a constituency in this house. And this house is going to celebrate our Republic celebration. And only one group of people are invited. And for those that don't know, this time around at 5 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, when we know Thursday is Independence holiday, that's when there was a fury of activity, sending invitations to members of the opposition to come to a function. If you sat down and you knew 3 weeks before that there were going to be these celebrations and on the Essequibo Coast and here and there and everywhere else, why couldn't we see the measure of the man, quote unquote, displayed? That from the time you're planning it, the invitations that would have gone out to the diplomatic community, that would have gone out to members of the government, would have gone out to the members of the opposition. I find it a total insult that you're going to send me an invitation at 5 o'clock, the afternoon before a function, especially when the function is on the Essequibo Coast. And I have to go on a boat, and there are limited boats available, spaces on boats going to the Essequibo Coast. It's a slap in the face.
Yeah.
So don't let's pretend that we have an environment where we can sit down and question. That does not happen. And there's enough discussion on what's taken place in Parliament that shows that is not the case. How can you have flooding in the Berbice couple months ago and you're not even able to discuss it in the Parliament? Fellow Guyanese underwater because it wasn't urgent enough, because it took place 5 days before, and it didn't take place 1 day before. That's how ridiculous the answer is. So the measure of the man that we hope to see in the way we engage each other does not exist anymore in Guyana. We don't have the president that picks up the phone and says, man, Kathy, come, let we talk. Mr. Norton, let we talk. We went over a year with no discussion. And we say we want to build a one Guyana.
Well, the parliamentary committees are not the possession or under the ownership of Ms. Gail Teixeira.
It is.
Parliamentary committees are run by the chairman and the secretary of the committee. I don't know that Ms. Gail Teixeira has to give approval for Ashley Singh to come anywhere. I wasn't aware of that. If the opposition allows the parliamentary committees to not to function independently, well then, I don't think
Ralph is really the other way. If those with the majority in the parliament doesn't allow the parliamentary committees to function in that way.
Exactly.
That's what Kathy's.
You write to the speaker and you copy the clerk saying that these committees need to meet. We have parliamentary committees that have never met. We have gone through the protocols of requesting that these be brought into action that we need to meet? Doesn't happen.
The
In
parliamentary committees
fact,
have opposition members chair the
I am
committees.
well, Mr.
There are
Ramcharan, I'm
opposition
well
members who
aware of
chair
that.
these committees.
I am well aware of that. I'm well aware of that. But Kathy Hughes can't send an email to the members and say, come and meet today at 5 o'clock. And the parliament itself, that's what I'm trying to say to you. Sir, it has changed drastically from the time you were there. And I think just looking at the previous speakers and how they've operated, including yourself, I think you guys did a fair and honorable and independent job. That is not what we have today, which makes it even more challenging. I could write 100 letters. I could put it in the chats. It does not happen. It does not happen. The message is you sit there and wait, and when we're ready, it's going to happen. And what do? We go to the public, we write a letter in the newspaper, we talk in discussion shows about things like this.
But listen, it is part of what Kathy was saying there that really influenced the question that I posed to you, because I read you very, very, very carefully. And you have talked about the way in which the government of the day kind of monopolize almost all of the space. And that's the reality. In the context of that monopolization of space, the sectoral committees can't work as you envisage them when you crafted it 20 years ago in the constitutional reform. And that's what I'm saying. Perhaps it's too much of a burden for somebody like you. You're no longer in the belly of the proverbial beast. And so therefore, there's a kind of burden that comes with that. And perhaps it's been unfair to you, all right? But I still look to persons like yourself, right, to go that couple inches further, and others. Because when I peruse our post-independence history, we have moved a couple of inches. And people like yourself stand up a little bit more erect than the rest of us. Right? That's why I place that burden on you. But I think we can come back another time and really get into that. I'll give the young man the last word. You've listened to us of the two immediate post-independence generations. Got it for the last half hour.
Yes, David. Thank you, Professor Hines. I've listened to both former honorable speaker Ramcharan and also honorable MP Kathy Hughes, and I'm seeing a problem, and it's a problem that we never tried to fix. The problem is really and truly, and as you rightfully said, it governments are able to monopolize everything, and it has to do with the two things: our electoral system as well as our constitutional system. I'm yet to hear a proposal that says, for example, let's have a change in the constitution that allows for shared governance after elections, meaning that we don't have to form a coalition before elections and go into the election, but we can form a coalition government at the outcome election. I think that is where it gives the opportunity for greater participation and also goes a long way in changing the present political culture that we have. I know for a fact that both of the two major parties seems opposed or seems a bit reluctant to go in that direction. But also I would like to see much more proposals for changes in the constitution emerging. So far, we haven't seen much of that in the discussion. The other thing is listening to both parties. I'm wondering where, because I see this discussion taking place at the top, but where is the people, the masses of the people in all of this? Because all the problems that you've identified, I think to some extent it is allowed to happen because the public is willing to allow it. Kathy, you talked about Joe Biden's action, but I can tell you the institutions and the people in the United States dictate to some extent how the president operates and what we behave. In fact, people vote on expectation of a certain behavior pattern. Why is it that we in Guyana getting it different? Is it our masses are somewhat different? Are we so blinded by ethnicity as to not be able to, well, is not be able to exercise our objective judgment in certain decision making? What is the problem? And I think that a lot of these discussions should start with the people, should start with the people in the grassroots. Very few parties I know have people's assembly, or and it's a very interesting thing because even our constitution has provisions for representatives of civil societies that can address parliament, and different other organizations could also address the parliament and take the issues to the parliament, but we're not seeing this. I remember before 2015, we had a whole heap of civil society groups, Justice for German and all these social justice groups springing up in in response to specific actions by the state. But then for some reason, after 2015, all of these groups disappear. But yet still, we still have in Afro-Guyanese complaining about marginalization and discrimination, but we haven't seen these organization of the people happening. So I think that while at the same time we seek to address the matters in parliament and deal with it at the parliamentary matter, for some part of it also should involve as a strategy to have the masses of the people educated and understanding where parties stand. And I'm saying this of both the opposition as well as the governing party.
I don't think it's an information that is intended, but as there the People's Assembly, you are participating in one right. You go through the discussions on this thing here, you would be amazed what the technology has allowed us to do is exactly what you're saying, but we call it social media, and we kind of place it outside of but it's happening. It's happening here every evening. You would be amazed if you go through discussion here. But I do agree that we need to merge this, what we call in social media, with what we call the mainstream. We have not yet mainstreamed social media. It's happening, my brother. Every evening, the merge has not happened. Thank you all so much for coming to this People's Assembly, because that's what we've been doing for the last 2 hours. Closing thoughts to this People's Assembly, starting with you, Kathy, Ralph, and then Dwayne. Okay.
Well, I do want to say, as we celebrate 56 years of independence, that we do every single day have an opportunity to chart a new course. Although it may sound as though, we have a lot of hurt and a lot of challenges ahead, I do feel that all of us, should we decide to sit together across the table, can work out a system that delivers to all the people of Guyana. And I just look forward to the day when we can be bold and we can be willing to have those real serious conversations. And again, to all Guyana, we look for better days always, and there's always hope. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Kathy, for coming on. Ralph?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'd like to congratulate all of you and the people of Guyana on the achievement of 46 years of independence.
56.
Guyana is better off as an independent country than it was as a colony. As we all agree, I think we can all agree, there is a lot of work to do, a far way to go, but let us hope that we use the resources that we have available now in a mature manner, and in a manner conducive to the development of all Guyanese. That's my hope.
Dwayne?
Well, first of all, I want to finish by saying happy 56th Independence Anniversary. And let's use the opportunity on this 56th anniversary of independence to chart a new course for Guyana, one in which we can give true meaning to our national motto of one people, one nation, and one destiny.
And thank you all. After 56 years, we have survived. We have survived. That is extremely important. And as we all agree here this evening, our challenge is how do we turn the present into the promise of the past? How do we transform this present with the promise of 1966? The promise of liberation, according to Ralph, and according to you and Kathy, of this Guyanese, this Guyana, this independent Guyana. Nothing comes easy. Independence didn't come easy. And liberation and transformation will not come easy. But if we continue to engage as we have engaged here this evening, let's be frank. It takes some bravery for Ralph Ramkoran to come on to David Hines' program on social media, and we need to clap that, and I think that in itself, that in itself offers us some hope. I've been wanting to invite Ralph for the last year. I hesitated, and one day I said, look, I go back with Ralph Lang now. Right? The most he can tell me is, David, I can't come by. And I did, and he came on. I think there is still hope that our independence can mean much more than it means today in concrete terms. Thank you all very much. And to the audience, thank you all very much. Happy independence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Politics is the heartbeat of a nation. It's not always pleasant, you know. Politics can be very nasty, as we know. But politics is necessary, it's essential. Politics is about who gets what, when, and how. And although it's a nasty thing sometimes, we have to turn it into something that is pleasant. And on Politics 101, we try to do that. We try to engage the issues. We try to ask questions. More than that, we are mobilizing our people because, you know, information and knowledge are essential to a functioning society, to a functioning democracy. Democracy is not just about elections and good governance, is also about an informed citizen, and inform the people. And that's what we do on Politics 101. We try to inform you, but we do so not by just giving raw information. We do so by a critical analysis. We ask questions. We locate the present in the past, and we locate the past in the present. We strive to turn Guyana into another kind of society. Our quest at independence is always freedom, and Politics 101 is about that freedom journey.